Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome back, everyone, to a very, very special episode of Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in pursuit of safety. We've got episode 50 here, and I'm with my co-hosts and brothers, Mike Bohan, Kenny Ray, and Jim Seibert, as we continue to discuss the anatomy of a safety meeting. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on over to Mike so that we can continue our episode on, again, the anatomy of a safety meeting. We got a little carried away last time, so we had to break this thing into two parts. So, Mike, if you want to, brother, go ahead and take over.
Absolutely. Well, first I'm going to say how cool it is that this is our 50th episode. And I'm just as proud as can be to be here with you guys and to be a part of this. I feel like it's a milestone for us, and I'm excited about that. I'm proud of it. And to all of our listeners, thank you out there. You know, let us know, send us a message. If you've listened to all 50 episodes, send us a message and let us know that. I'd be interested in that. I think it would be cool for us to hear from you, from our longtime listeners. But a really cool thing for us. So congratulations to you guys, my co-host here. Good job, Aaron and Amanda. Congrats to you guys for putting up with us for 50 episodes. So, good for you guys. We appreciate all you do for us. So guys, let's jump into this. Last time we were together, we talked about the first couple of points on this anatomy of a safety meeting. And they were, point one was the goals of a safety meeting, which is probably the most important part of figuring out what we're going to do with our safety meetings. The second point was who the key players are, who's presenting, who's attending. We've got to know those points. So that's point one and two. Point three on this anatomy or this structure of a safety meeting that we talked about is what are we going to talk about? What's the message that we're going to present at this safety meeting? So the best way to do this is to break this into two categories. One of the categories is going to be information that's industry-wide. It's going to be a focus for every trucking company that's out there. And they're usually national focus areas, and we'll break that down a little bit. The second one is going to be areas that are specific to your company, things that you need to talk about because it's specific to us. So when we look at the national focus areas, we've got organizations like the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, the National Safety Council, the Department of Transportation. All of these entities are going to be involved in these national focus areas. And I'll give you one example that happens every year that we need to hit on, and it's a safety meeting wrapped up with a bow on top, all ready for you to go. And that's International Road Check, right? We've got a 72-hour event every year that comes around every year, and we know it's coming. It's publicized beforehand. There's a couple of focus areas that they give us before it comes up. They put some publications out on their website. The CVSA does on their website in multiple languages. Everything's there for you. All the information is there for you. So if you're a safety director or you're in charge of coming up with the message for your company, all you have to do is go pull that information off their website, research it, make sure you understand it, and present that to your team. It's there for you. And there's so many things throughout the year that you can do this with. Like I said, Road Check, Operation Air Brake, Operation Safe Driver Week, Distracted Driving Awareness Month comes around in April, Work Zone Awareness Week, Drowsy Driving Prevention Week. All of these things are publicized, heavily publicized in the industry and nationwide. And it's all areas that are important, safety-related information for your team, for your drivers, for your operations folks, for all your employees. And it's there for you. All you got to do is go get it and pull it. Because this is an area when we talk about a message to be communicated, people struggle with this. It's like, well, I can get a meeting scheduled, but I don't know what we need to talk about. I don't know what to say or do. Well, start here. This is a great place to start. Whenever these national focus areas come up, just go out there, get the information, grab it. It's a great tool to utilize. Now, again, that's across the board. That's something that pertains to all trucking companies. It's nationwide. We get that. What about the message that's specific to our company? And you guys have heard me say this. There's two terms that I want you guys, our listeners, to remember when we look at information that is specific to us, because a lot of this comes from the data that's being generated from our company. It's frequency and severity. What's frequency? Well, it's how often something's happening. What's severity? Severity is really how much it costs us. It's usually less in dollars and cents, but if you think about people being injured, fatalities, things like that, there's usually dollar signs associated with those types of claims and injuries and accidents. So think about frequency and severity, and then start looking at the data you have at your fingertips, right? The two areas we can start with, and these areas may change, the data coming in may change month to month, but the two areas you can start with is your roadside performance, your CSA scores. Go to the SMS site, make sure you're looking at that information, and your loss runs. So if you can go into those two areas and look at frequency and severity, you're never going to run out of something to talk about, ever, because those are two areas that are extremely important. We've talked about regulatory compliance. We've talked about preventing accidents. This is the lagging indicators in those two areas, and we need to look at this. Okay, a good example would be if you go into the unsafe driving basic at your company and you're alert in that area and you look at what violations are happening and you say, well, we're not having any really critical violations. There's no excessive speeds. There's no texting while driving, but we're sure having a lot of 6 to 10 speedings. Well, we got a frequency issue that's causing you to be alert in that area. So focus on that area. It could be the exact flip of that, where you may not have very many violations at all, but you've got a couple of texting while driving. Okay, we've got a breakdown here. We've got a severity issue. There's only a couple of them, but this is a big deal, and we need to get this corrected. You've got a topic there, okay? You can do that in every one of the basic areas. You can do it in the crash basic area. Look at that information, the data that's provided to you, and look at frequency and severity. And you do the same thing with your losses. If you're having a bunch of low speed, low impact type accidents in parking lots, hitting poles, backing into gates and fences, things like that, may not be costing you very much per accident. But if you add all those little bumps and bruises up, and it's nickel and diming you to death, and you can see we've got a frequency issue here. We need to make sure that we are addressing this issue. It could be that you're not having very many claims at all, but you've got a couple of significant rear end crashes or upsets where it's quite a bit per accident, a couple $100,000 in reserve, whatever the case may be. Well, now we've got a severity issue. Both of these areas are extremely important to address with your team. So when we're looking at a message that's specific to you to communicate, look at the data you're receiving, look at frequency and severity. A couple other areas you can look at as far as a specific message for you, geographic locations. This is something that could be if you're driving out the West Coast, mountain terrain driving. This is something you can train your employees on, your drivers on. Driving up north, winter weather, inclement weather type training, something you can definitely hit on with your employees, and not just your drivers, but your operations folks as well. This could be a customer location, and you guys have heard me tell this story. I've had a customer that had an issue where they had 3, I think, claims in a very short amount of time hitting a low bridge, getting to a customer location. And they saw that information and said, okay, we've got an issue here. We've got a frequency and severity thing because it happened multiple times and the claims were relatively large. Well, they pulled together, had a safety meeting and talked about this. And, lo and behold, the claims go away. They fixed that issue, communicating with their team, being transparent, communicating with their team. And then they made that a part of their orientation training as well, so they wouldn't have that in the future. They said, hey, we're going to reroute everybody around this. This is the way we're going to get to this customer. Let's not have any more of these claims. So we're no longer going this route to get to this customer. So they fixed it. It was information that was specific to them by looking at their losses, but it was based on a geographic location. Some other things you guys can look at when it comes to the message that's specific to your company. It really kind of depends on what your duties are and the commodities that you're hauling. If you're a hazmat carrier, there's some specific training that you're going to do there that's required by regulation. So that's an area that you look at. It's specific to us because of the commodity that we haul. That example that I've used on the flatbed hauler, where you're training folks on load securement, things like that. That's an area of training that you're going to need to do with your employees to make sure that they understand exactly how you want them to do it. So, because it's the way you do things, and to make sure that we're in compliance with the regulations. So there's a lot of different things you can look at when it comes to a message that's specific to our company. But I want you guys to remember, when you get that feeling like, you've got writer's block and you don't know what message that you need to present, or you don't know what your people need to hear, go back to your roadside performance, which is your CSA scores, and your losses, and look at frequency and severity, and you'll have a message. Anytime you want to talk to your team, you've got a message, because that stuff can change pretty often, right? When we look at the message that we want to communicate, which is a really important aspect of a safety meeting, we also need to talk about how you're going to get this message out, how we're going to communicate that. And I know in the first part of this podcast, in part 1, we talked about the challenge of getting everybody together, and everybody being in the same place at the same time. And I get that is a challenge, but we also talked about thinking outside the box and thinking about how we can do things instead of how we can't. And when we think about how we're going to communicate this message, the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of the areas that we're talking about here kind of has the connotation that we're going to have everybody together in the same spot. Well, that may be the case. Maybe it's in shifts. Maybe you've got some people there in person and some people there via Zoom. Think outside the box on this, because everybody needs to hear the same message. To have a strong safety culture, everybody needs to be on the same page. So ways we're going to communicate the message. The first one is classroom training, right? We just got attendees. We've got a presenter that's like a lecture. We've got information that we need to present, and we're going to get that out to the folks, and then we break and everybody goes about their way. It's a traditional way to get training done. It's effective, but it's not the only way to get training done. We've got remote training. There's a lot of vendors out there that do video training. There's libraries that you can log into, and there's an LMS system for a lot of those. So, employees would have specific logins. They do the training. They'd have to pass a test with a certain percentage to get through. It's a great tool to utilize. Highly recommend you all looking into that. It's just, again, another way to do your training that's different than just the classroom facilitation or the lecture training. Another aspect is the hands-on training, where we probably learn the most. And I don't know if our listeners out there, if you've heard of the 70-20-10 line of thinking when it comes to learning, but 70%, they say 70% of our learning comes from hands-on, 20% comes from working with peers or a mentor, and then 10% comes from the traditional classroom training, stuff like that. So it's important that we mix all this stuff together. So the hands-on training could be literally on the job training, or it could be an instance where, we in part 1, we talked about bringing those external experts in. So maybe you have a safety meeting where you've got a classroom portion where you're talking about pre-trip inspections, and then you invite somebody from the highway patrol to come in, and we go outside and we have a truck, tractor, and a semi-trailer sitting out there, and they walk us around a truck and show us what they look for when they're doing an inspection and what we should be looking for when we do a pre-trip inspection. And they can kind of see hands-on what it looks like out there. I think that's a great way to do some hands-on training and kind of mix and match classroom training, hands-on training, and then hopefully we're catching a little bit more as far as the content that we're putting out to our attendees. They're catching a little bit more of a percentage when it comes to the learning. But regardless of what we do there, we want to make sure we end on a positive note. Even if it could be that, hey, we're doing great, keep up the good work, team, or it could be we're not quite there yet, and this is how we're going to adjust and go forward. Whatever the case may be, make sure that we understand this is a team effort. It's no one division of your company's fault. It's not the driver's fault. It's not operations fault. It's not the safety department's fault. It's if we're lacking in a certain area, this is a team effort. And I think that's important for you to communicate, saying, hey, this is an area where we're not quite there yet, and we're going to get better as a team, and this is how we're going to do it. I think it's extremely important that you communicate in that way. And regardless of how you set it up, what the structure is, what kind of mix you use when it comes around to your actually presenting this information, we want to make sure that our information is very accurate. You know, we talked before, Barry brought this up, you safety directors out there, you're the subject matter experts, especially when we're dealing with regulatory issues. We need to make sure that our information is accurate. It's extremely important that we get things right. We can't be giving out bad information when it comes to the regulations. So let's make sure it's accurate. We need to make sure it's clear. We need to make sure that we present this in a way that it's easy to understand and that people can get what we're saying. We need to make sure it's applicable to the folks that we're presenting to. Okay. If it doesn't apply to them, one, we're wasting time. And if we're wasting time, we're wasting money. And that should be a goal of us. Jim kind of mentioned that before, where it's safety is good business. If we want to have the bottom line needs to be good. We want to have a good profit margin. Well, let's not waste time presenting information to a group that doesn't apply to them. So let's make sure it's extremely applicable and it's going to help whoever's listening to us get better, help us reach our goals. And then finally, we need to make sure that our information is confirmed. And by that, I mean, we need to make sure that the folks that we make sure that the folks that are listening to us present information understand what we're saying and can do whatever we're asking them to do. And whether that is with a test, whether that's with a physical demonstration, you know, I keep coming back and using this example of load securement on a flatbed. Well, if we do some classroom training on load securement, well, let's go out in the yard and do some hands-on demonstration. Do you understand what we're talking about? How to secure this load, how to actually do what we're asking you to do. Make sure that we confirm that our folks are getting that, because we don't want there to be any miscommunication. Definitely don't assume that people just get it. Make sure that we're confirming that. Okay. Now, when we talked about all the way through this process so far, and in part one, we talked about the goals and the key players, and now we're talking about the message that needs to be communicated and the way we're going to communicate that. Through this process, we need to make sure that we are building skills within our folks. This is what we should be working towards with this tool that we're utilizing called a safety meeting. We should be increasing knowledge within our team, engaging employees, increasing communication, whether that's from the leaders, from the safety department, from our peers, from our external experts. We're increasing communication. We're creating a positive safety culture because we're all in this together. We're all working towards the same goal. It's not just one division. We're saving money. We're reducing risk. We're protecting life by preventing accidents. Those are our goals. That's what we should be working towards, right, guys? I mean, that's what we're after here.
Say, Mike, I know you're fixing to transition and talk about the when and the where of holding a safety meeting, but before you do, Jim made a comment on episode 1, or the last episode. I guess it's technically 49, but part 1 of this 2-part series. Jim made a comment that some safety directors will feel overwhelmed when they hear this, and that particularly if they're inexperienced, they're new, they don't have a technical background, they come out of the HR department or whatever. But what would you suggest? Because the owners of the company, senior leadership, are going to be looking at the person in the safety department that is tasked with the responsibility of establishing, holding, conducting these safety meetings. The senior leadership of the company is going to look at that person as the subject matter expert. And yet that person may internally be saying, but I'm not. I'm not a subject matter expert. I know they think of me as that, but I don't have the skill set. So what kind of encouragement would you, and I thought Jim gave excellent encouragement by letting them know they're not in this alone. There's a lot of people out there that will help them. But from a very pragmatic standpoint, what can somebody that's in the trucking industry that needs to get better equipped from a skill set, what would you suggest? Where would they start about basically increasing the quality and the scope of their own internal toolbox?
Kenny, the first place that I'm going to tell anybody that's listening to go when it comes to what this idea of bettering yourself, increasing your knowledge, increasing your experience. The first place I'm going to tell somebody to go is their state trucking association. I am a very active member in the Missouri Trucking Association. Kenny, I know you are down in Texas. And one thing throughout my career as a safety professional that I've done is I've always tried to surround myself with people that know more than I do, that have more experience than I do, that are just a few steps ahead of me in the process. And I think that's extremely, extremely important. So I'm going to encourage you all, if you're a safety director out there or a safety manager at a company, and you're asking that question that Kenny just asked, where do I go? Reach out to your state trucking association and say, hey, how do I get involved in this? Do you have a safety council? Do you have regular meetings that I can attend? Where can I get involved? And it's extremely valuable because I know we were all just together a few months ago down in Texas at a meeting, and I saw it there, and I know it's the same way when we have our meetings in Missouri. It's not just motor carriers that show up there, so you're going to have other safety professionals there that are other safety directors that you can meet with and visit with. But there's also the highway patrols there, the FMCSAs there. I mean, there's regulatory agencies there as well. So you can pull from that a lot of good information there. There's always going to be a safety topic. There's going to be a presentation there. You're going to be talking about regulatory issues. What better way to start than right there? Now, if you wanted another level of that, and you say, oh, I need to get some additional training, I want to get better in this particular area, look into organizations like NATME and the Certified Director of Safety course that they have. That's a great way to better yourself, to gain some knowledge. And again, you're networking there with some folks. And you're getting a designation out of that. You're getting a professional designation out of that. So, Kenny, that's a couple areas there that I would highly recommend. One, whatever state that you're in, get involved in your state trucking association. And then the second one, if you're looking for some technical training that you could even get a designation out of, go on the NATME website, research their CDS program or their CSS program, and that's an area where you can get some good training because. In addition to the state associations, I know there's national associations as well, but we're talking about a starting point. And I think the great starting point is your state association. Get involved there, get to know some folks. You won't regret it. 100% believe that. So the next thing on our bullet pointed list here, when we're kind of fleshing out what a safety meeting is going to look like, is when safety meetings should happen. We've talked about the goals. We've talked about the key players, the message, how we're going to present the message, but we need to talk about when and where a safety meeting is going to happen. And these two things are kind of just the logistics of how we're going to do this. Now, the when comes in a couple different ways. And I think it's important that we hit on all these. But the very first thing I'll mention is when it comes to a safety message is an orientation class. Now, I know, again, we've got companies that are various sizes. You may have an orientation class every week of 20 drivers, but you may have an orientation class of one every few weeks. I get that. But make sure that there's a safety message in that orientation, because that's the point where you're setting the tone for that driver. Or that employee, if you've got a new employee coming in, you need to make sure that you let them know up front, safety is a value to us. It means something here. This is part of who we are. This is part of our culture. Make sure they know that up front and set the tone right up front. Okay. Because we don't want them coming in not knowing. We want to be able to communicate, which again is one of our goals of our safety meeting. We want to be able to communicate with them and say, this is who we are, what we do, how we do it. Make sure they get that up front. I believe it's extremely important. Another time we need to do safety meetings is where there's maybe a specific need or an immediate need for your company. And that could be generated from telematics data that you have, and it could be a specific driver. It could be critical events coming from your telematics, which might be a one-on-one meeting, or it might be an issue where we've had some near misses and it's just a company-wide meeting. Say, hey, we're having some issues here with following distance, and we need to make sure that we're touching on this in a safety meeting. But that may be something that's specific to your company because it's information that you're getting from your telematics or specific to you. from your roadside performance. So that falls into one of those categories as far as the message goes that's specific to you. But don't ignore that stuff. Again, it could be one-on-one, could be company-wide, but make sure you're addressing that when it comes up. Make sure that also when we have something like that that does come up, where we have an immediate or specific need, that we don't let that drag on, because the longer we let it drag on, the more likely that it's going to fall through the cracks, and we're never going to get that safety message out to the folks that it needs to get out to. So be timely with that information that needs to go out, whether it's pulling everybody together, having a company-wide safety meeting, or we're having that one-on-one. We need to make sure that we're timely in our message. Could be to meet a regulatory requirement. Again, we've hit on that before. A great example is that's our folks out there that are hauling hazmat. We know that there's a regulatory requirement there that we're training our employees when they come into our company, and then every 3 years. So there's other areas of that reasonable suspicion training for supervisors in the drug and alcohol testing realm. We need to make sure that we are trained there, and we've got documentation of that. So there's a couple of specific areas, but we also need to remember that in the regulations in Part 390, it tells us that we are responsible as motor carriers to train our folks regarding the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. So it doesn't just mean that there's only a couple areas in the regulations that we specifically have to train. We have an obligation. We've got a responsibility, and it's spelled out in Part 390, where it says we have to train our employees on the regulations that apply to them and apply to us as motor carriers. So remember that that's there. And if, again, we go back to the message that we communicate, if you ever run out of something to talk to your folks about, there's quite a bit of information in those federal regulations that you can pull from, and you can visit with your folks about. And then finally, it's just a regular scheduled meeting. Hopefully you guys on the calendar, you've got regularly scheduled meetings, and this could be, once a month, once a quarter, twice a year. Could mix and match in the ways you do that, but make sure that you've got a schedule, make sure that you stick to that schedule. And that's really kind of up to you on how that's set up and how it's structured. But again, that's when a safety meeting might happen. A couple of things on the timing. And this is just stuff that this is kind of Mike Bohan talking here when it comes to the timing on this. But when we look at a safety meeting, let's make sure that we start on time and we're respectful of everybody's time. If you show up and you say, hey, we're going to start at 8:00 in the morning, and somebody's not there at 8:00, go ahead and start your meeting. And, you've got a group there that showed up on time. Go ahead and present. If somebody showed up late, and I'm not saying it's for a bad reason. Maybe they had an issue that they couldn't be there on time. Well, don't hold up everybody for the one. Catch that one up later. Because if you look at timing when it comes to, one of our goals is being successful financially and safety being good business. If we've got, let's say, and I use 8 because it's easy math, but if you've got 8 people there waiting 15 minutes for one person to show up, well, we've just wasted 2 hours of time there. Those 8 people sitting there for 15 minutes for one person to show up. So just go ahead with your meeting, get the message out. That person shows up late, that's fine. Say, hey, I'll catch you up later. Once the meeting's over, everybody goes on, you can grab that one and catch them up. I believe that's important. We don't want to hold up, if we're wasting time, we're wasting money. If we're wasting money, we're contradicting one of the goals that we had to begin with, and that was being successful financially. So if you're having longer meetings, make sure we're scheduling breaks. I know Kenny's got a great hazmat presentation, does a lot of training there, and it's not, you're not going to be done in 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, it's a half day plus to get that training done. So you need to make sure you schedule in breaks for your folks. 45 minutes to an hour is about all people can do before they start needing to stretch their legs or use the restroom, things like that. So make sure you're scheduling those breaks in, and make sure you've got enough time set aside that you can get everything on your agenda done. And that's one thing I haven't really brought up, but we should, is for every safety meeting that you do, make sure that you've got an agenda. Make sure that you are, because we talked about our goals and what we want to get out of this. So don't set a goal and then not put it on an agenda and figure out how you're going to reach that goal. So make sure you've got an agenda, especially if you're bringing in those external experts. You've got somebody else coming in, or you've got multiple speakers. Make sure everybody's on the same page. It's like, hey, you're going on at 8, you're going on at 9:30. Make sure everybody's on the same page and knows what's happening, and everybody knows what the message is that's being communicated. I feel like that's important. That's going to help you be more successful in your meeting. It's going to go a lot smoother. if everybody's on the same page when it comes to who's presenting. So get yourself a good agenda when you're doing your safety meetings. The where, guys, this is where you need to get creative. Again, this is something that is going to be different for every company, because there's companies out there that are large companies. They've got huge conference rooms and they've got facilities that they can hold safety meetings at that's on site. It's theirs. They own it. And we've got companies that don't have that. They don't have that ability to do that. So they're looking outside of their facility. They're looking at, a conference room at a hotel or a restaurant or something like that. Or they're maybe looking at their shop or out in the yard, or maybe they've got a little bit of warehousing. So they're looking out in the loading dock area. And guys, those are all areas that I've done safety meetings at. I've done safety meetings in rooms that felt like a broom closet, but it's, you've got to get creative on this as well and think outside the box. And shops work great. Warehouses work great. The one thing I will caution people is, if we're pulling everybody in and trying to get everybody together in a safety meeting, make sure that, let's say, for example, you're out in the maintenance shop and you got a couple of mechanics 2 bays over still working on a truck. Your safety meeting is going to be kind of noisy. Just go ahead and pull those guys on over, have them be a part of the safety meeting, because there's some information they're going to need to hear as well. And I think you'll find that will work. A couple other things to keep in mind there is extreme temperatures, really hot, really cold. If you're looking at those areas where you're out in a shop or you're out in a dock area, something like that, both of those areas can be very hot and very cold depending on the time of year. So make sure you think about that in the process of setting up your safety meeting and where you're going to hold it. But again, don't let this be a stumbling block for you. Don't just automatically say, well, we don't have a facility. We don't have a place to do that, because, I've trust me. And I'm sure you guys are all the same. I've done safety meetings just about anywhere you can think of. And obviously some work better than others, but make it as conducive to learning as you can. But don't let it stop you from having one if you don't have a real nice conference room that you have access to all the time. Just think outside the box, do the best you can on this. And I think you'll find that it's not quite as hard as you might think it is right up front. Okay. Now let's get to the last part of this. And guys, I want you to jump in on this in any way you feel as I'm wrapping this up, at least with my portion of flushing out this safety meeting is looking at what we've accomplished in a safety meeting. We've set out our goals. We've talked about our key players. We've talked about the message, how we're going to communicate the message, the when and wheres of the safety meeting. Now we need to look at evaluating what we get out of this. We're evaluating the learning that's happened, hopefully, in the safety meeting we've held. And this can be done individually and it can be done collectively as a company. And I think it's important to look at both of those areas individually. If you've got an area where you had a driver or an employee with an issue and you had to bring some corrective action in play or maybe some additional training, we need to evaluate if that worked, if that employee is getting better. So we're looking at their roadside inspections. We're looking at maybe their scorecard from their ELD or their telematics provider. That's something we need to evaluate. But when we look at this in a bigger picture and we look at this as a team mindset, collectively is what really we're after. And we can do this again. And I've mentioned these two areas before. A couple of ways we look at this. Let's say our CSA scores. If we look at a basic area and we knew we had an issue with that basic area because it was high, it was elevated, it was above the intervention threshold, and we had our safety meeting and we said, here's an issue we're having. We're completely transparent. The leadership got up and said, here's the issue we're having, and here's how we're going to get better. Well, we need to track our performance after that safety meeting to see if we're getting better or not. And if we've got a nice downward trend, everything's looking good, we're improving, we're getting better, then our safety meeting and the message that we're communicating, it worked. If we're not, if we're staying the same or we're getting worse, then we need to reevaluate and adjust at what we're doing. Okay. It's the same thing with our losses. If we look at our losses and we were having an issue in a specific area and we're tracking our data after that meeting and after the message and after the reinforcement of that message, and we're not getting better, then we got to readjust what we're doing. We got to make an effort in a different way to help us get better. And I feel like that's really, when it comes to, Kenny had mentioned this before. He asked me this before about what's the most important part. And I feel like setting our goals and what we want to get out of a safety meeting is really the most important part of this. But a close second is making sure that we're following up on this and we're evaluating what we're doing. Because what happens if we don't do this? If we just do the same thing we've always done over and over and over again, we know we have an issue. We're alert with our roadside scores. Our losses aren't great. And we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. We're going to keep missing the mark. We're not going to hit where we want to be, right? We're never going to get better. If we evaluate where we're at and say, okay, we got to be honest with ourselves. We didn't get better here. It didn't work. So we need to adjust our message. We need to adjust how we're doing this. Maybe we did a classroom training. We need to bring in another type of training. We need to do some hands-on training because it didn't stick. It didn't work. We need to continue to make that adjustment. And every adjustment we make hopefully gets us closer to hitting that ultimate mark of preventing accidents and helping keep our folks safe. And really the ultimate goal is protecting life there. So I think we continuously need to evaluate and adjust. And that's a team process, because when we go through a safety meeting, we present the message, and then there's a group effort to emphasize that message through information going back out to the team, to the drivers, to all of our employees. You can put stuff up in the office, all of it, and we're just reinforcing that message, and then we're tracking what we're doing. And you guys heard me mention this, that plan, do, check, act cycle of improvement that you see in the NATME CDS course. If you've been through one of those courses, you see that a lot. Use that for safety meetings. You come up with your plan. You've got what you want to do. You execute your plan. You check to make sure that you're getting the results you want. If you are, great, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, then we need to make an adjustment. And hopefully those adjustments get us closer to hitting that mark of protecting life.
You're talking about evaluating and seeing long-term results, but I've had the privilege of watching all three of you guys, my colleagues on this podcast. I've had the personal privilege of watching each of you teach in person. I've watched you conduct safety meetings in person. And one thing, Mike, you and Barry, I've always observed through questions and answers with the audience, you're evaluating while you're teaching, seeing, are they getting it? And the cool thing is, if you didn't get the response back that you expected from your question, you went back right then and modified or adjusted the program and either said it a different way, repeated it, which is a classic way adults learn. And you made sure the guys and gals in that classroom didn't leave until they had grasped what it was that the idea that you and Barry had wanted to convey to them. And Jim Seibert, I want to tell you, I've had the privilege to watch him 3 times in person teach his forklift safety class, which is phenomenal, beyond imagination, the best I've ever seen. And I've told y'all before, this is my 37th year in the safety business, and his forklift presentation is the best I've ever seen, bar none, period. And one thing I've always admired about Jim, and Mike, I've seen this in safety directors that have a little bit of hesitancy to intervene if somebody's not doing something exactly correct. And it goes back to that old adage, whatever we tolerate becomes the norm. Yeah. And so I've watched Jim teach forklift, and then he makes the operators operate the forklift. And if they don't do it exactly right, he doesn't just grin and turn his head and say, oh, well, golly, I guess he didn't understand. Jim goes over there almost like a referee in a football game and says, whoa, time out, I'm blowing the whistle. And he stops right then and has a seizable, teachable moment. I've watched him do it over and over and over. And he's not patronizing. He's not condescending. He doesn't chew the guy out. He just says, hey, all right, what you just did wasn't exactly right. Let's talk through it again, and then I want you to demonstrate it to me again. And my point is, Mike, you're talking about evaluating the safety programs as to what kind of impact they have long-term on our metrics. But while the meeting is going on itself, the presenters can be evaluating and adjusting based on either the feedback they're getting from their students or, like I said, in Jim's case, the performance he's seeing from the people he just taught, and then having the courage, having the strength of conviction to step in and intervene if they're not doing it right. So kudos to my three colleagues for the way y'all do that. I'm so proud of all three of y'all, and you're all three excellent instructors. And I've just learned so much that from watching each of you teach, and classic example of the three of y'all practicing exactly what you're teaching us here today.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know the other guys do as well. But I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't when you were talking about Jim's his teaching, because it's too important to not get right. I mean, we have to get this right, because when we look at what the end result is, what our goals are, at what we want to get out of this stuff, when you're talking about making sure people get it right in the moment, looking at feedback, because 30 minutes later, they could be on that forklift and severely injure themselves or somebody else. We need to make sure, because it's too important. Life's too important. Those employees are too important. And we need to make sure we get that right. So I agree 100%. And I agree with what you said about these two gentlemen on here, Jim and Barry. These guys are awesome. And I love the way that they present and get the message out, and are the utmost professionals when it comes to things like this, safety meetings in general. And guys, I hope that's beneficial to you, the folks that are listening to us. And before I turn it back over to Barry, I just want to say again, congrats to our crew on 50 episodes. Again, I think it's really cool, and I'm honored that we're talking about something that means something to me on this episode. So congrats to the crew. You guys are awesome, and thanks for letting me be a part.
Before we go ahead and get out of here, just to reiterate what Mike said there, this is an awesome crew to work with. And, before I came on, I had listened. I think I was one of the bigger fans. I don't know if I was the biggest, because I've met some people at some different events that are pretty big fans, but just to know that it's been going for 50 episodes. This is incredible. These are great little tidbits that we share. And like Mike said, this is something that's very, very near and dear to all of our hearts. We love the anatomy of safety meetings, and we love the psychology behind them too. So with that being said, I want to just say a quick thank you to our listeners. You guys are the ones that make this happen. Without you, we've got nobody to talk to. So, again, thank you so much. You've made it go for 50 episodes. We hope to go another 50 more. That being said, that's all the time we have for Driving the Line, the podcast that's always in the pursuit of safety.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.